I stood on the porch of the house I'd called home for 35 years, holding a suitcase that couldn't possibly contain everything I was. My hands shook. The Arizona sun beat down on my shoulders, but I felt cold, so cold my bones ached. Behind me, the door I'd painted sky blue last spring, the door I'd walked through as a young bride, clicked shut with a sound like a coffin closing. Richard's voice still echoed in my ears. "Get out." That's all he'd said. Just those two words, flat and final, while that woman, Vanessa, stood behind him with her arms crossed and a smile that made my stomach turn. 35 years. 3 decades of cooking his favorite meals, nursing him through pneumonia, working double shifts so he could finish his degree. Gone. Erased like I'd never existed. My neighbor Margaret rushed across her lawn, her face twisted with shock and fury. "Come on, honey," she said, taking my suitcase. "You're staying with me. We'll figure this out." I couldn't speak. I just followed her, my legs moving automatically while my mind screamed questions I had no answers for. That night, lying in Margaret's guest room that smelled of lavender and safety, I stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how my life had shattered so completely. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I almost ignored it. But something made me look. First National Bank of Phoenix. Why would the bank be calling at 8:30 at night? "Ma'am, this is Mr. Patterson from First National. I apologize for the late hour, but we need you to come in tomorrow morning. It's urgent. It concerns your account, there's something you need to see immediately." I sat up, my heart suddenly pounding. What could the bank possibly want with me now, when I had nothing left? Before continuing, if this story is touching your heart, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Don't forget to ring the notification bell, because every day I'm bringing you stories of women who turn their deepest pain into a new good way of living their lives. Hold on before stopping this video, because what happens next may be so impactful that it will lead you to a powerful conclusion that could change how you see your own life forever. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard's face, not the cold, cruel mask he'd worn when he threw me out, but the young man I'd fallen in love with at 22. We met at a community college in Tempe. I was studying to be a teacher. He was working toward an engineering degree but struggling with tuition. I remember the day he sat next to me in the library, frustrated over a calculus problem, running his hands through his thick brown hair. I helped him that day. And the next. And the one after that. 6 months later, we were married in a small ceremony at the courthouse. My parents weren't thrilled, they thought we were too young, too unprepared, but I was so sure. So certain that love was enough. I dropped out after our first year together. Richard needed to focus on his studies, and someone had to pay the bills. I worked mornings at a diner and evenings cleaning offices downtown. I came home smelling of grease and bleach, but I didn't mind. We were building something together, or so I believed. When Richard graduated, we bought the house on Saguaro Street. It wasn't much, a small ranch with a yard full of rocks and desert scrub, but it was ours. I planted roses along the fence, painted every room myself, made curtains from fabric I found on sale. I turned that house into a home while Richard started his career. The early years were hard. His entry-level salary barely covered the mortgage. I kept working, kept sacrificing, kept believing that things would get better. And they did, slowly. Richard got promotions. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. I never went back to school. There was always a reason. We needed a new car, the roof needed repairs, Richard's mother got sick and needed help with medical bills. My dreams folded up smaller and smaller until they fit in a drawer I stopped opening. But I told myself it was okay. I told myself that marriage was about sacrifice, about partnership. I cooked his favorite meals. I kept the house spotless. I organized his life so he could focus on his career. When he came home stressed, I listened. When he was sick, I stayed up all night making sure he had everything he needed. I remember when he had pneumonia 12 years ago. The doctor said it was serious, that he needed constant care. I took a leave from my part-time job at the library, the one I'd finally gotten after years of hoping for something more fulfilling. I sat beside his bed for 2 weeks, monitoring his fever, making him soup, reading to him when he couldn't sleep. "When you're better," he'd said, his voice weak and grateful, "I'm going to take you somewhere special. Anywhere you want to go." We never took that trip. There was always something else. Something more important. Something more urgent. Looking back now, lying in Margaret's guest room with moonlight filtering through lace curtains, I could see the pattern I'd been too close to recognize. The way my needs always came last. The way my dreams were always postponed. The way I made myself smaller and smaller to make room for his life to expand. But when had he stopped loving me? When had I become disposable? I thought about the last 2 years. That's when things really changed. Richard started working late more often. He became critical. My cooking wasn't as good as it used to be, the house wasn't as clean, I'd let myself go. He stopped touching me, stopped really looking at me. I tried harder. I started dyeing my gray hair. I bought new clothes even though we didn't have extra money. I signed up for a gym membership I couldn't afford. But nothing I did seemed to matter. He grew more distant, more irritable, more absent. 6 months ago, I saw a red sports car in our driveway one afternoon when I came home early from the library. Richard said it belonged to a colleague who'd stopped by to drop off some paperwork. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? We'd been married for 35 years. But now I understood. That was Vanessa's car. She'd been in my home, probably laughing at the outdated furniture, the framed photos of a marriage that was already dead, and I just didn't know it yet. 3 months ago, Richard started being secretive about the mail. He'd snatch it up before I could see it, sort through it in his office with the door closed. When I asked about it, he snapped at me. "Why are you always questioning me? Can't I have any privacy?" I'd backed off, hurt and confused. 2 months ago, he started taking calls in the garage. I'd hear his voice through the door, low and urgent, sometimes laughing in a way he hadn't laughed with me in years. And then last week, everything accelerated. He told me he wanted a divorce. Just like that, over breakfast, as if he were commenting on the weather. "I don't love you anymore," he said. "I haven't for a long time. I want you out of the house." I'd been so shocked I couldn't even respond. I just sat there, coffee cup halfway to my lips, the world tilting sideways. He gave me 3 days. 3 days to dismantle a life that took 35 years to build. I called my sister in California, but she was dealing with her own crisis, her husband's cancer treatment. I couldn't burden her. I had a few friends, but most had drifted away over the years. I'd been so focused on Richard, on being a good wife, that I'd let other relationships wither. Yesterday morning, was it really just yesterday? I packed a suitcase with shaking hands. I walked through each room of the house, touching walls I'd painted, furniture I'd chosen, memories embedded in every corner. The kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals. The living room where we'd watched television together every evening for decades. The bedroom where we'd slept side by side, where I'd listened to him breathe, where I'd felt safe. All of it gone. When I came downstairs with my suitcase, Richard was waiting with Vanessa. She looked around with obvious disdain, as if everything I'd built wasn't good enough for her. As if I wasn't good enough. Richard opened the door and stepped aside. That's when I knew it was real. This wasn't a fight we'd recover from. This wasn't a rough patch. This was the end. "Please," I'd said, my voice breaking. "Can we at least talk about this?" "There's nothing to talk about," he replied. And his eyes were empty. Like I was a stranger. Like I'd never mattered at all. Now, in the darkness of Margaret's guest room, I wiped tears from my cheeks and tried to imagine what tomorrow would bring. What could the bank possibly want with me? We had a joint account, but Richard controlled the finances. He always had. I didn't even know how much money we had. Maybe there was a problem with the account. Maybe Richard had already emptied it, and they were calling to tell me I had nothing. But Mr. Patterson had said I needed to see something. His voice had been urgent but not angry. Almost excited? No. I couldn't let myself hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was what had kept me in a marriage that was slowly killing me. I pulled Margaret's quilt up to my chin and closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Outside, the desert night sang with insects and distant traffic. Somewhere in the darkness, Richard was probably lying next to Vanessa in the bed I'd made up with fresh sheets every week for 35 years. And I was here, in a borrowed room, with nothing but a suitcase and a mysterious phone call from a bank. Tomorrow, I'd go see Mr. Patterson. I'd find out what he wanted. And then I'd figure out how to survive the ruins of my life. That's all I could do. Survive. One day at a time. I didn't know yet that survival wasn't going to be enough. I didn't know that tomorrow, everything would change again, but this time, in a way I could never have imagined. Margaret drove me to the bank at 9 the next morning. I'd barely touched the breakfast she made, scrambled eggs and toast that tasted like cardboard in my mouth. My stomach was twisted in knots. What if this is bad news? I said as we pulled into the parking lot. Margaret squeezed my hand. Then we'll deal with it. But honey, stop assuming the worst. You've had enough worse to last a lifetime. The bank was cool and quiet inside, all polished floors and the soft hum of air conditioning. A young woman at the front desk smiled professionally and asked if she could help. I have an appointment with Mr. Patterson. Oh yes, she said, her smile brightening. He's expecting you. Right this way. She led me down a hallway to a corner office. Through the glass walls, I could see a distinguished man with silver hair rise from behind his desk. He wore a conservative navy suit and wire-rimmed glasses, and his expression was hard to read, serious but not unkind. Thank you for coming in, he said, extending his hand as I entered. Please, have a seat. Margaret started to follow me in, but I shook my head. I need to do this alone. She nodded and settled into a chair in the waiting area. Mr. Patterson closed the door and returned to his desk. He opened a file folder, glanced at the contents, then looked up at me with an expression that made my heart pound. I'm not sure where to begin, he said carefully. This is somewhat unusual. Are you aware of a trust fund established by your late father-in-law, Robert Brennan? I blinked. Richard's father? He passed away 8 years ago. I knew he'd left some money to Richard, but I don't know the details. Richard handled all of that. Mr. Patterson nodded slowly. Yes, there was an inheritance. But there was also a separate trust fund, established when you and Richard were first married. According to the documentation, Robert set it up specifically for you. For me? My voice came out as a whisper. Why would he do that? Mr. Patterson pulled out several pages clipped together and turned them so I could see. According to these documents, Robert made it clear in his instructions. He wanted to ensure that you, specifically you, would be financially secure. The trust was set up to mature after 35 years of marriage or upon his son's attempt to divorce you, whichever came first. My hands started trembling. I stared at the papers, but the words blurred together. I don't understand. Mr. Patterson's expression softened. Your father-in-law apparently saw something in the early years of your marriage. Based on notes attached to the trust documents, he was concerned that his son took you for granted. He wanted to make sure you'd be protected. Tears welled up in my eyes. Robert had always been kind to me. He'd praised my cooking, thanked me for taking care of Richard, told me I was the best thing that ever happened to his son. But I never imagined. How much? I asked, my voice barely audible. The trust has matured to $340,000. It's yours. Solely yours. Richard is not listed as a beneficiary and has no legal claim to it. The room tilted. I gripped the arms of the chair, sure I was going to faint. $340,000. I'd been thrown out of my home with nothing. I'd spent the night in a borrowed bed, convinced my life was over. And all along, there was this safety net I never knew existed. But Mr. Patterson wasn't finished. There's more, he said gently. The house on Saguaro Street, are you aware of how the title is held? Richard owns it. We bought it together, but... He pulled out another document. According to county records and the documentation we have on file, the house was placed into a joint trust shortly after purchase. Robert established it and funded the down payment. The terms state that neither you nor Richard can sell or refinance without both signatures. The house cannot be transferred out of the trust without mutual written consent. My mind reeled. But Richard threw me out. He said the house was his. Mr. Patterson's jaw tightened. He cannot legally do that. You have every right to be in that house. In fact, and this is where things get more complicated, your husband attempted to access your trust fund 3 weeks ago. What? He came into this office with a notarized letter claiming to have power of attorney over your financial affairs. He attempted to have the funds transferred to an account in his name only. I felt sick. 3 weeks ago. That was right before he told me he wanted a divorce. Our legal team reviewed his documentation and determined it was fraudulent. The signature he claimed was yours was clearly forged. We denied his request and informed him that we would be contacting you directly. That's why he threw me out, I whispered. He knew I'd find out. I believe so, yes. Mr. Patterson's expression was grave. I'm very sorry this has happened to you. But I want to be clear, you have significant legal and financial standing here. Your husband has attempted fraud. He's illegally excluded you from your own home. And you have assets he cannot touch. He slid a business card across the desk. This is an attorney I'd recommend. Rebecca Chin. She specializes in divorce and financial fraud cases. I've already taken the liberty of calling her office, with your permission, of course, and she can see you this afternoon. I picked up the card with shaking hands. Everything was happening too fast. Yesterday I had nothing. Today I had hundreds of thousands of dollars and legal rights I didn't know existed. Why didn't Robert tell me? I asked. Why keep it secret all these years? Mr. Patterson smiled sadly. According to his instructions, he wanted the trust to be a safety net, not a source of conflict. He hoped you'd never need it. But if you did, if his son ever betrayed you, he wanted you to have the means to stand on your own feet. Fresh tears spilled down my cheeks. Robert had seen me. Really seen me. Even when I couldn't see myself. There's one more thing, Mr. Patterson said. He opened a sealed envelope and pulled out a letter. This was to be given to you only if the trust was activated. It's from Robert. He wrote it 28 years ago. He handed me the letter. My hands shook so badly I could barely unfold it. The handwriting was Robert's, careful, precise, the handwriting of an engineer. Dear daughter-in-law, if you're reading this, my son has failed you. I pray that day never comes, but I know my boy. He's brilliant and ambitious, but he learned from his mother to take good people for granted. I've watched you sacrifice everything for him. I've watched you make yourself smaller so he could be bigger. I've watched you give and give until I worried there'd be nothing left of you. This money is yours. Not because I pity you, but because I see you. You are worthy of security. You are worthy of respect. You are worthy of a life that belongs to you. Don't let him take this from you. Don't let anyone make you feel you don't deserve it. Stand tall. You're stronger than you know. With love and respect. Robert. I couldn't stop crying. Margaret heard me through the glass and came into the office, wrapping her arms around me while I sobbed into her shoulder. Mr. Patterson waited patiently. When I finally composed myself, he spoke again. I know this is overwhelming. Take your time. But I strongly encourage you to see Attorney Chen today. Your husband is likely planning his next move, and you need legal protection immediately. I nodded, wiping my eyes with a tissue Margaret handed me. Okay. Yes. I'll go. Before we continue, make sure to like this video and subscribe. With your support, we can keep bringing more stories from powerful women that touch the heart of all of us. Margaret drove me straight to Rebecca Chen's office downtown. I clutched Robert's letter in my lap the entire way, reading it again and again, as if the words might disappear. Attorney Chen's office was on the 14th floor of a glass high-rise. Everything was sleek and modern, so different from my simple world of second-hand furniture and carefully budgeted groceries. A receptionist led us into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Phoenix. Moments later, a woman in a sharp charcoal suit entered. She was probably in her early 40s, with intelligent eyes and dark hair pulled into a perfect bun. I'm Rebecca Chen, she said, shaking my hand firmly. Mr. Patterson filled me in on the basics. Let's talk about where you stand and what we need to do. For the next hour, I told her everything. She took notes, asked precise questions, and occasionally nodded with an expression that was part sympathy, part anger. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. Here's the situation. Your husband has committed fraud by attempting to forge your signature. He's illegally denied you access to your marital home. He's likely been hiding assets in preparation for divorce. And he's underestimated you. She smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile, it was the smile of someone who enjoyed winning. We're going to fix this. First, we file for divorce immediately, citing abandonment and fraud. Second, we get a court order allowing you back into your home. Third, we freeze all joint assets so he can't hide anything else. Fourth, we file a police report about the attempted fraud. That's a criminal matter. Can he fight this? He can try, Rebecca said. But the evidence is overwhelmingly in your favor. The bank has documentation of his fraud attempt. The trust documents are ironclad. And Arizona is a community property state. You're entitled to half of everything accumulated during the marriage, plus your separate trust fund. My head spun. Half of everything? Half of his retirement accounts, half the value of the house, half of any other assets. Based on what you've told me about his career, we're likely talking about several $100,000 beyond your trust fund. I couldn't breathe. Yesterday I'd been thrown out with nothing. Today I was learning I had rights, money, power. But there was something else gnawing at me. Something I needed to know. Why? I asked. Why did he do this? If we'd just gotten divorced normally, he'd have kept half. Why try to steal everything? Rebecca leaned back in her chair. In my experience? Because men like your husband don't just want to win. They want you to lose. They want you to have nothing. It's not about the money, it's about power. About making you feel worthless. Her words hit me like a physical blow because I knew they were true. Richard hadn't just fallen out of love with me. He'd wanted to destroy me. But he'd underestimated his father. And he'd underestimated me. Okay, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. What do we do next? Rebecca smiled again, and this time it was genuine. Next, we go to war. And we win. It took Rebecca 3 days to arrange everything. 3 days of paperwork, court filings, and strategy sessions. 3 days of living in Margaret's guest room while my entire world reorganized itself around a truth I was still struggling to comprehend. I had power. I had rights. I had money. But more than that, I had proof that Richard had tried to rob me. On Thursday morning, Rebecca called. "We have the court order. You can return to the house today. I've arranged for a sheriff's deputy to accompany us, standard procedure in these situations. He'll ensure everything remains civil." My stomach churned. "I'm not sure I can face him." "You can," Rebecca said firmly. "And you will. Because that house is yours as much as his, and he needs to understand that his game is over." Margaret drove me to Saguaro Street at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Rebecca met us there in her silver sedan, and a sheriff's vehicle pulled up moments later. Deputy Morrison stepped out, a tall man with gray at his temples and a calm, authoritative presence. Rebecca handed him the court order. He reviewed it, nodded, and looked at me with kind eyes. "Ma'am, you have every legal right to be here. If anyone interferes or threatens you, I'll handle it. Understood?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. We walked up the path together, Rebecca, Deputy Morrison, Margaret, and me. The roses I'd planted along the fence were blooming, bright red against the beige stucco. I'd watered them faithfully for years, pruned them, talked to them like old friends. I rang the doorbell of my own house. There was movement inside, then the door swung open. Richard stood there in khakis and a polo shirt, looking annoyed until he saw the deputy. His face went pale. "What's going on?" Rebecca stepped forward smoothly. "Mr. Brennan, I'm Rebecca Chen, attorney for your wife. We have a court order granting her immediate access to this residence. Please step aside." She held out the document. Richard snatched it, his hands shaking as he read. His face went from pale to red. "This is ridiculous. I own this house." "Actually, you don't," Rebecca said calmly. "The house is held in a joint trust established by your late father. Neither you nor your wife can exclude the other without a court order. And since you're the one who illegally removed her from the residence, the court has ruled in her favor." "Who's there?" Vanessa's voice came from inside, high and sharp. She appeared behind Richard, wearing expensive yoga pants and a tank top that showed off her gym-toned body. Her eyes went wide when she saw all of us on the doorstep. "What the hell is this?" Deputy Morrison spoke for the first time. "Sir, I need you to step aside and allow these people entry. This is a legal court order." Richard's jaw clenched, but he moved. We walked into my house, my home, and it felt both familiar and alien. Everything looked the same, but it felt violated somehow. Vanessa's designer purse sat on the coffee table I'd refinished myself. Her shoes were scattered by the door. There was a wineglass on the kitchen counter, my kitchen, where I'd cooked thousands of meals. Vanessa crossed her arms. "You can't just barge in here." "Actually, I can," I said, finding my voice for the first time. "This is my house. You're the one who doesn't belong here." Her face twisted with anger. "Richard, are you going to let her talk to me like that?" But Richard wasn't looking at her. He was staring at Rebecca with barely controlled fury. "What do you want?" Rebecca opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "I'm serving you with divorce papers. Additionally, we're filing a complaint with the police regarding your fraudulent attempt to access a trust fund that doesn't belong to you." The color drained from his face again. "I don't know what you're talking about." Rebecca pulled out copies of the bank documents Mr. Patterson had given me. "First National Bank has documentation showing that you attempted to access a trust fund established by your father, solely in your wife's name. You presented a forged power of attorney with her signature. That's fraud, Mr. Brennan. That's a crime." "That's bullshit," Vanessa snapped. "What trust fund?" And there it was. The moment everything clicked into place. Richard turned to Vanessa with a look of pure panic. Shut up. But Vanessa wasn't done. You said the money was going to be ours. You said once she was out of the picture, we'd have everything. The room went silent. Even Deputy Morrison raised his eyebrows. Rebecca smiled slowly. Thank you for that. Ms. Vanessa Hunt, she said automatically, then seemed to realize she'd made a mistake. Thank you, Ms. Hunt. That statement will be very useful. Richard's face had gone from red to almost purple. Vanessa, I said shut up. But the damage was done. Vanessa realized it too. She turned on Richard, her voice rising. You told me she was just a dried-up old woman who'd never fight back. You said the house was yours, the money was yours, everything was yours. You said we'd be rich. I stared at Richard, and in that moment, I saw him clearly for the first time in years. Not as the young man I'd fallen in love with. Not as the husband I'd served and supported. But as a stranger, a greedy, cruel stranger who'd calculated my destruction. You knew about the trust, I said quietly. Your father told you about it years ago, didn't he? Richard said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. You knew that if you stayed married to me for 35 years, I'd get that money. So you waited. You waited until just before the anniversary, and then you tried to steal it before I found out. His hands were shaking now. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said, and my voice was stronger than I'd heard it in years. You thought I was stupid. You thought I'd just disappear quietly, grateful for whatever scraps you left me. You thought I'd be too broken to fight back. I stepped closer to him. My father-in-law knew you better than I did. He knew exactly what kind of man you were. That money should have been mine, Richard burst out. He was my father. Everything he had should have gone to me. But it didn't, Rebecca interjected smoothly. He chose to protect his daughter-in-law instead. And frankly, looking at the situation, I'd say he made the right choice. Vanessa suddenly lunged toward me. You ruined everything, you pathetic old. Deputy Morrison moved between us instantly. Ma'am, step back. Now. Vanessa froze, breathing hard, her face ugly with rage. I think we're done here, Rebecca said. Deputy, I'd like to have Mr. Brennan served with a restraining order. Given his attempted fraud and Ms. Hunt's threatening behavior, my client needs protection. Agreed, Deputy Morrison said. He pulled out paperwork from his jacket. Mr. Brennan, you're being served with a temporary restraining order. You are to stay at least 100 yards away from your wife at all times, pending the divorce hearing. What? Richard's voice cracked. You can't throw me out of my own house. The house belongs to both of you, Deputy Morrison said. But given that you illegally removed her first, and given the documented fraud attempt, the court has ruled that you need to vacate for the time being. You have 1 hour to pack essential belongings. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll arrest you for trespassing. This is insane, Richard shouted. I've lived here for 35 years. So have I said softly. But you threw me out like garbage. He stared at me, and for just a second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Was it regret? Shame? But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold hatred. You'll regret this. No, I said. I won't. The only thing I regret is wasting 35 years on someone who never valued me. Vanessa grabbed her purse. Come on, Richard. Let's get out of this dump. But Richard wasn't moving. He was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time, really seeing me, and realizing he'd made a catastrophic mistake. The trust fund, he said hoarsely. How much? Rebecca answered before I could. That's confidential. But I can tell you that combined with her share of marital assets, your wife will be very comfortable. More comfortable than you, certainly, once we finish dividing everything. You can't take my retirement. It's community property. Rebecca's voice was ice. You should have thought about that before you committed fraud. Richard's face crumpled. He suddenly looked old, older than his 58 years. Vanessa pulled at his arm impatiently, but he shook her off. I never meant, he started. Yes, you did, I interrupted. You meant every bit of it. You just didn't think you'd get caught. Deputy Morrison gestured toward the stairs. Sir, you need to start packing. Richard climbed the stairs like a man going to his execution. Vanessa followed, muttering under her breath. We could hear them arguing in the bedroom, my bedroom, their voices sharp and angry. Margaret squeezed my hand. You did it, honey. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. Sad. Relieved. Angry. 1,000 emotions swirling together until I couldn't separate one from another. 20 minutes later, Richard came down with 2 suitcases. Vanessa followed with her designer bags. They didn't look at me as they walked past. At the door, Richard paused. He turned back, his mouth opening like he wanted to say something. I waited. But no words came. He just shook his head and walked out. Through the window, I watched them load their bags into Vanessa's red sports car. I watched them drive away down Saguaro Street, past the roses I'd planted, away from the life we'd built and he'd destroyed. Deputy Morrison touched his hat. Ma'am, if you need anything, don't hesitate to call. After he left, it was just Rebecca, Margaret, and me standing in the living room of my house. Are you okay? Margaret asked. I looked around at the familiar walls, the photos of a marriage that had been a lie, the furniture I'd chosen with such care. I don't know, I admitted. But I will be. Rebecca packed up her briefcase. The divorce hearing is in 6 weeks. Between now and then, we'll do a complete asset investigation. He's probably hidden things, and we'll find them. You should also consider changing the locks, getting a security system, and documenting everything in the house, take photos, make lists. Protection. After they both left, I walked through the house slowly, room by room. Everything was here, my life, my memories, my history. But it all felt different now. Tainted. Like looking at something beautiful through dirty glass. In the bedroom, I found Vanessa's earring on the nightstand. I picked it up with 2 fingers and threw it in the trash. Then I stripped the bed, carried the sheets outside, and stuffed them in the garbage bin. I would never sleep on those sheets again. That night, I lay in my own bed, in clean sheets I found in the hall closet, and stared at the ceiling. The house was so quiet. No sound of Richard's breathing beside me. No familiar routine of turning off lights and locking doors together. Just me. Alone. But not lonely. For the first time in 35 years, I belonged to myself. 6 months later, I sat in my new condo in Scottsdale, sipping morning coffee on a small balcony that overlooked the desert mountains. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of orange and pink that took my breath away every single morning. The divorce had been finalized 8 weeks ago. Rebecca had been ruthless and thorough. Richard was forced to sell the house on Saguaro Street, neither of us wanted it anymore, too many ghosts. I received my half of the sale price, plus half his retirement accounts, plus half of everything else we'd accumulated over 35 years. Combined with the trust fund from Robert, I had more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. Not rich, not extravagant, but comfortable. Secure. Free. Richard and Vanessa's relationship had imploded before the ink dried on the divorce papers. Turns out Vanessa had only wanted him for money she thought he had. When she realized he'd have to split everything, she left him for someone with a more impressive bank account. I heard through Margaret that Richard was living in a small apartment now, bitter and alone. I didn't feel satisfaction at his downfall. I didn't feel anything at all. He'd become a stranger to me, someone I used to know in another lifetime. The fraud charges had been dropped after Richard paid restitution and agreed to court-ordered financial counseling. Rebecca said we could have pushed for prosecution, but I didn't want to. I just wanted it over. My condo was small, just one bedroom, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every painting on the wall, every dish in the cabinet, I'd chosen them. Not because Richard liked them. Not because they were on sale. But because I wanted them. I'd started volunteering at a women's shelter downtown 3 days a week. Women who'd been where I was, thrown out, betrayed, told they were worthless. I listened to their stories. I told them mine. I watched them learn what I'd learned, that survival wasn't enough. That we deserved more than survival. Margaret visited twice a week, and we discovered we both loved true crime podcasts and bad reality television. We laughed until we cried, ate ice cream straight from the container, and talked about everything and nothing. Last month, I'd gotten a call from the community college in Tempe. They needed someone to volunteer as a tutor in their adult learning program. I said yes without hesitation. Yesterday, I'd helped a 53-year-old woman who was going back to school after her divorce. She'd cried when she finally understood a math concept she'd been struggling with. I gave her my number and told her to call me anytime she needed help. I understood now what Robert had tried to tell me in that letter. I was stronger than I knew. I just needed to be pushed hard enough to find that strength. Some mornings I still woke up sad. I still grieved sometimes, not for Richard, but for the young woman I'd been, the one who'd believed love meant sacrifice. I wished I could go back and tell her that love should make you bigger, not smaller. That marriage should be a partnership, not a prison. But I couldn't change the past. I could only live in the present. My phone buzzed. A text from one of the women at the shelter. She'd gotten the job she interviewed for, the one she thought she'd never be good enough for. I smiled and texted back my congratulations. Then I poured another cup of coffee and watched the sun climb higher over the mountains. Was I happy? I wasn't sure yet. Happy felt too big, too overwhelming. But I was content. I was peaceful. I was free. And that was enough. More than enough. I thought about Robert sometimes, wondered if he was watching somehow, if he knew his gift had saved me. I hoped he did. I hoped he knew I'd stood tall, just like he'd told me to. The attorney Rebecca had sent me a final invoice last week with a note attached. You are one of the bravest clients I've ever represented. Watching you find your strength was an honor. I'd framed that note and hung it in my bedroom where I could see it every morning. Because she was right. I'd found my strength. It had been there all along, buried under years of being told I wasn't enough. But it had survived. I had survived. My phone rang. I glanced at the screen, a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Hi, is this the math tutor from the community college? My daughter gave me your number. I'm 62 and I'm going back to school, but I'm terrified of math. Could you help me? I smiled. Of course. When would you like to meet? After I hung up, I sat for a moment longer, finishing my coffee as the desert bloomed in morning light. Richard had thrown me out thinking I was nothing. He tried to steal my future thinking I'd never fight back. He'd underestimated me so completely it was almost funny. His father had known better. Robert had seen me when no one else did, including myself. And now I saw me too. Finally. Clearly. I wasn't the dried-up old woman Vanessa had sneered at. I wasn't the disposable wife Richard had discarded. I wasn't weak or worthless or invisible. I was a woman who'd survived betrayal and found herself on the other side. I was someone who'd taken pain and turned it into purpose. I was enough. I had always been enough. Standing on my balcony with the desert wind on my face and the sun warming my shoulders, I realized something profound. Richard hadn't thrown me out. He'd set me free. And I was never going back. If this story moved you, click on the next video that's appearing on the screen now. I'm sure you'll be surprised by this new emotional and heartbreaking story I have right here to tell you.